Hello and welcome in. I'm Collette Wieland alongside Dr. Stephen Camarata. Steve is a best-selling author, professor, and all-around child development expert. And today we're going to be continuing our conversations about late talkers, specifically about the stressors that often come as a parent, as a family, with that late talking child. So the first thing that came to my mind is the stress that parents put on themselves. Let's touch upon that a little bit.
Yeah, so raising children in today's society, generally speaking, is very complex and very difficult. There's just lots of forces trying to keep up with education, which seems to put higher and higher demands earlier and earlier. And with a late talker, all that intensifies. And it's really true that parents are always so worried, and then they think about if they're doing everything exactly right, and if there's a little bit of a challenge, then they kind of start thinking about whether they could have done something better, and that can just be very intense and overwhelming.
Or even blaming themselves, like, did I do something wrong
Parents
to create
blame
my
themselves.
child as to be a late talker?
Yeah, parents blame themselves a lot, and particularly mothers. It's a gift to mothers, I think, in some ways, but fathers too. I was meeting with a family yesterday, a little girl with severe hearing loss who was late talking because of the deafness, and the dad asked me, hey, are there things I should have been doing before, and it's just not helpful. And really, every parent I encounter, they're doing everything they can for the child, but we're not perfect, and we're going to make mistakes, and that can be overwhelming, when we have a late talking child, because the development is different, and then that puts more pressure on the parents and does more of this kind of guilt, and also sadly, some people outside will blame the parents, so.
You mean people that are supposed to be the helpers?
Yes, yeah. So one of the things that I get I'm pretty calm mostly, but I get really upset because I have been in meetings where other professionals have said, well, if you would have brought your child in earlier, this would have looked different. Mm-hmm. And number one, it's not true. But number two, why in the world would you ever say that to somebody who's already being overwhelmed by worry and guilt? And it's just not helpful at all.
How do you help these families take that pressure, take that stress off?
Yeah, so one of the most important things is to kind of separate yourself from the expectations of society and to step back and say, this is my late talker, this is who they are, they're an individual, and I'm not going to be thinking about whether they're at grade level or one of my children was late talking, but another one was early talking. And so if we look at the early talking one and compare it to the late talking one, they're very different. And so it's really important just to see the child as an individual, get into that, and just say to yourself, I'm doing the best I can. Sometimes I'm going to make mistakes, but I know I'm doing the best I can. And that's the whole key to it, is to kind of step outside of all the pressure. And it's easier said than done, but that you have to do that. You've got to take the long view and not be panicking from moment to moment when the child is not up to speed in other areas. That's just really crucial.
Would you say that almost every family that comes to see you has some sort of stress or level or blame to themselves?
Always, every single one. I can't think of a one that didn't. Because I was a late talker in the work I do, I can honestly say that I really wasn't that stressed about it. But I think it was a unique combination of experience and then also growing up a late talker myself. I could understand kind of how it was going to unfold. But I think for most parents, they've never seen one before, they don't know about it, and it just is overwhelming. And that, every single parent asked me that, did I do something to cause this? Mm. And a lot of them say explicitly, I really feel bad about this, that, or the other that happened. My mom dropped me down the stairs. I went head first and was unconscious. And she always felt like,
That's why you didn't
Yeah,
talk.
Right. Well, and, obviously they were, if they had baseline, they would know. It's just my temperament. But, the point is that, there's always events like that happen. Most moms don't drop their kid down the stairs. But, obviously she didn't throw me down the stairs. It was an accident. Sure. And it just comes with the territory. And, it's just inherent. And the key is just to try to be calm and focus on your child. That's the key to it.
You started to touch about this, but I want to expand. So parents feel a lot of pressure to make sure that their child is on the same normal developmental path, right? So what can we say and what can we offer to help those parents to take a minute, pump the brakes, if you will?
Yeah. Okay. So this is actually something. I was part of a working group that produced a report in the National Academy of Science, Medicine, Engineering. And one of the things that's happening with late talkers of all different kinds is that people are working so hard to keep them at grade level, they lose sight of the long-term goal of raising an adult and making sure that a child can read, can do math, and just have basic skills. These children are going to be on their own time frame. And also, a lot of what we do in schools isn't really necessarily essential. And so it's really important that we take the long view and say, okay, how am I going to align my learning today when the child's in preschool and early school with how I hope they're going to be as an adult? And that's the key to it, This is, one example I use. So late talkers on average get potty trained later. They kind of usually come around when they're 4. And because of preschool, there's a lot of pressure to have them do it at 3. And so early on, a lot of parents are asking me about it. And, we have ways of accelerating it. But I just say, I can promise you with 100% certainty, your child is not going to be in diapers when they're 18. And so that, I don't mean to be flippant, but the idea is that, we don't have to panic right now. Eventually this child, will be potty trained. And if we're systematic, eventually this child will read. My late talking son, it took him literally through middle school before he learned to read fluently. Now he's in book clubs. He had a political science major. And if I had pushed the panic button when he was in first grade, second grade, third grade, and so on, I really honestly believe he would hate to read. And now he loves to read. And we have wonderful discussions about really pretty deep philosophical books. And that's the point. I knew that if I was systematic, didn't necessarily panic when I got note home from school and then pressure from the school to do this, that, or the other in this moment, I knew that over time, if I nurtured his reading, that he would be a good reader. And that's what happens, so.
I just listening to you talk about this, it really makes me think we have to have some sort of societal shift to take that pressure off of parents and the expectations that every kid should fit into this box.
Yeah, I think, without getting into a long discussion, there was this notion that happened, about 100 years ago. People were really fascinated by assembly lines. Like one of the education leaders visited the Ford assembly plant. And the idea is, we can teach people this way. So previously we had an idea of, meeting children where they were and then making sure that children learn things to competency before we moved them on. I may or may not have this right. The metaphor does it. There was an old TV show called The Beverly Hillbillies, and if I'm remembering correctly, one of the characters said that second grade was the happiest 3 years of his life. And we say that in a facetious way, but the point was that you couldn't go to third grade until you had mastered second grade material. And now we're just moving kids through based on age and grade without necessarily attending to what they need to learn. We do need a societal shift, and this push has coincided with a precipitous drop in our world standing. For reading and for math, we're now in the bottom half of the 30s. In other words, there are, basically 30 to 40 countries that are ahead of us in every subject, even though we spend far and away the most money on education. And I'm convinced that a key contributor is this need to push people forward. There are many, many school districts where less than half of the kids, sometimes a third. Some districts, none of the kids are competent when they graduate high school. I mean, we need a societal shift. And in my opinion, the shift has to be teaching the children the key concepts they need to mastery and don't let them go forward until they own that knowledge. That's so important. And that's how we work developmentally. That's a basic developmental principle. But the education isn't working that way. And that's a real challenge for all children. But for late talkers, it's even more of a burden, and families of late talking children.
Speaking of the families, is there usually one parent who carries more of the stress, more of the weight? I know you said mothers, it often falls, but is that pretty typical that you see?
Yeah, so one of the really important points, and I really appreciate your asking this question. So there are good data showing that families of late talking children, they have a higher divorce rate. And this is my impression. I don't have data on this. The divorce thing is data, And I've seen it not infrequently where a lot of times the late talker will come because the mother's often the primary nurturer, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. It's often how it rolls. The mother's attention really gets focused on that child. And then I've also had, like I'm working with a dad right now, who had all these dreams for what his son was going to do in terms of education and all these kind of things. This particular late talker has some core learning challenges that are going to make it more difficult for him on into the future. And his dad basically is just kind of, really struggled with that because he really has this idea of what his child's going to be. And it may not happen the way it's unfolded. So anyway, long story short, there's kind of a cauldron there of factors where mom is more focused on the child, dad may have some disappointment. There may be arguments, more and more arguments back and forth between the parents. Sometimes they're not on the same page in terms of what should be done. And this is a recipe for difficulties in the marriage that sometimes results in separation. But anyway, I really want to just say explicitly that when a late talker comes into the home, it's important to kind of think about nurturing the relationship, mothers and fathers making sure they're getting together. When I'm teaching parents when I'm coaching parents on how to teach their late talker, if there's a disagreement between the husband and the wife, I don't work on that goal. I find something where there's consensus so they can work together. And we have to be very mindful, because it is certainly true that in every family, but certainly in late talking families, there's just a lot of strain. And so that can really be hard on the marriage. And fathers and mothers kind of need to be prepared for that.
Is there some sort of emotional or counseling support for these families, in addition to the therapies and maybe the speech help for their child?
I really recommend that people reach out. To my knowledge, there's not anything specific to this. I've had a few just informal conversations with colleagues in the psychiatric and adult psychology counseling world, and I really think that there ought to be more proactive support in these situations, because like if a family has a child with Down syndrome, that has its own unique dynamics and challenges, and it just would be helpful if families had kind of an expectation, or expectation is too strong a word, just to offer support from the get-go to say, you know what, we know this is a difficult journey. We want to support you in this. And that, to my knowledge, doesn't exist in a systematic way.
When it comes to a child with speech delays, do you often see emotional delays too? And how does that shift the family dynamic when you have a very emotional child, perhaps?
Yeah, that's another, you're asking such great questions. You always do. So particularly in something like autism, where there's a reduced motivation, and most late talkers have social maturities, that can also be particularly difficult, because it can cause challenges with siblings, it can cause challenges with peers, and again, because teachers and sometimes parents, they don't necessarily understand the dynamics of late talking. They might look for other reasons. Like my own late talking son in high school, one of the teachers thought that he wasn't making his best effort, but it turned out that he was struggling with material that was provided in the lectures, and that by that time he was a good reader. So if he read something, he could do well on a test. But when it was from a lecture, like a quiz, he wouldn't do very well. And so the teacher, not understanding that, thought, well, he's not making a good effort. And so people tend to see the late talkers, or like if a late talker has autism, then they start thinking about why they're behaving that way, and they can ascribe things to bad parenting. I've actually been involved in some cases where people are assuming that the family is mistreating the child, in some ways. So that kind of stuff can happen, and it's one of the downsides. And again, it's adding to all these stressors we've been talking about.
How does a late talker change the family dynamic, if at all? Maybe it doesn't.
Oh, no, late talkers do change the family dynamic. So part of it is, oftentimes mom is going to be maybe more focused on the child. We kind of talked about that, because they feel like they need more support. I know, like with my own late talking son, when he was a preschooler, his needs were that because he was late in talking and he had a language disorder, which is a late talking that's a symptom. His late talking was a symptom of a language disorder. Whenever he would initiate verbally, it was really important that we attend to that. Mary and I, both as speech pathologists who do this work, we would do that. And our other children would say, how come you're favoring him? And it's like, well, he really needs us to go ahead and, respond to him immediately. That's what he needs right now. And we love you very much, but
it's hard. They're still kids.
We can hold you off. We don't need to respond to you immediately. It's not really essential. For him, it is, and so that's just an example. I will say, like my youngest, which was my daughter. The older ones would go to her, hey, ask dad for such and such, because they knew I was more likely to grant her request than theirs. So in a way, there's family dynamics that are kind of normal. But the late talkers do kind of change the dynamic. And oftentimes, like let's say you're going to the store and your late talker is likely to have kind of a meltdown in the store. Well, then you've got to plan a visit to the store that's different than you would for other families that don't have these challenges. So sometimes because of sensitivities, and then even just like management, a lot of children growing up, you can kind of talk to them verbally and manage their behavior verbally. Really, with late talkers, when you're interacting with them and you're doing management and training, you want to use few words. So the whole style is different. Your child may go into the school and then the teacher may be giving them a lot of instructions, and then that may end up with some kind of a little bit of a tantrum or something, because it's just they're talking so much. It's like the person's talking to them in a different language, and the teacher won't necessarily know that. So those are all examples of changes. There's a lot of changes in the family dynamics with all late talkers, really.
I have heard some parents describe the journey very lonely. Having the stress of a late talking child, and they feel alone, that no one else can relate to them. I think that's a big reason why we're here, is to let them know they're not alone, right? And share those stories. But what can you say to these families to ensure that this doesn't have to be a hard journey by yourself?
So it is more common than a lot of people realize. So in my experience, a family might have their late talker in their community, and they're kind of the only one that they know. But in reality, the patterns, things they're going through are actually kind of common with all late talkers. And 1 in 10, 1 in 12 children are late talking, so it's common. It's just that they may not necessarily encounter that in their community. So I think today with internet, social media, and so on, I think reaching out is really important, and even just kind of trading information and just sharing that kind of platform and forming those bonds for families. I have some involvement in the Down Syndrome Association of Middle Tennessee, and the families with Down syndrome really do a great job. They have socials. Like this past spring, I was at an Easter egg hunt at a park with the families, and so doing that kind of thing is, I think, really nurturing and supportive. So seek that out. It does exist. Again, you can get on our website, latetalkers.org, and there's some resources there. But definitely connect, and definitely don't feel alone. You're not alone, even though it can feel that way.
When you've made those connections for people and then checked back in, have you seen a big shift in their attitude and their quality of life?
Definitely. So even just being able to say, my late talker did this to another mom or another family, and then that person says, oh yeah, that happened to me, and here's what I did. Those moments are very nurturing. And a lot of the families, so some of the original families that we started working with, 30 years ago, their children are grown up and they still interact with each other. They've kind of formed lifelong friendships and, out of this. And that's really wonderful to see.
Thank you so much for this conversation today, Steve. And thank you all for being here, just spending a small part of your day with us. We hope you'll join us for the next one. In the meantime, please feel free to drop your questions below in the comments section. Click subscribe so we can keep getting this valuable information to you. Hit the bell. And of course, you can always check out the Late Talkers Foundation website.
And always remember, the best thing for your child is you.